Welcome to Hilary Topper On Air, the podcast you can't afford to miss.
Do you want to write a novel? Do you have the perfect story, but when it comes time to writing it all out, you get stuck? I'm Hilary Topper, and this is Hilary Topper On Air. Today, I'm speaking with Peter G. Pollak, who's the author and owner of Expendable Publishing. Hi, Peter. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Okay. I had a career as a journalist, an educator, and an entrepreneur. But when I retired in 2007, I decided to take up an ambition I'd had since I was a teenager, which was to write a novel. And I worked at it, and eventually it got it published, and people liked it, so I kept writing. And for the past 10 years or so, I've written 6 novels, and I'm working on number 7.
That's so awesome. So tell us a little bit more about Expendable Publishing and some of the novels that you've written.
Okay. Well, the world of writing and getting published has changed dramatically, as I'm sure everyone who's listening knows, as a result of technology. My father wrote a children's book, and in order to distribute it, he had to buy thousands of copies, which sat in our basement in boxes for years.
Wow.
That all changed with print on demand and the internet. So today you can publish a novel yourself. It's called indie publishing or self-publishing. You don't have to go the traditional route, although that's certainly something that many people aspire to. But you can do that, and you can find customers to purchase your novel either in ebook form or in print form all over the world. It's very easy. And so when I started, I looked around and I thought about the cost and the time involved, and I said, well, I'm just a beginner, so I better try this myself, get it published myself, and see if people like it. And if so, then we'll see what happens. So that's how I created Expendable Publishing. My 6 novels are all thrillers. They have a common theme, which is the main character, whether in some cases a police detective or a former detective or just a simple businessman, find themselves in a predicament. And they have to, the story is, details the predicament, whether it's solving a mystery or getting out of trouble, and how they do that.
Interesting. And then you recently wrote a 40-page pamphlet called 10 Things You Need to Know to Write a Novel. Can you tell us about that and how people can get that?
Okay, well, it's easy to get. It's available on Amazon in ebook form. And the reason I wrote this is, in addition to writing novels myself and learning the hard way, making mistakes and learning how to avoid them, is I've been involved in critique groups for a number of years. A critique group is where a group of writers get together and they share their writings. And one of the jobs of a member of the group, in addition to submitting your work, is to read other people's drafts and to offer comments, critiques. So over the time, I learned a lot about the ambitions that people have and the expectations they bring to the idea of writing a novel. Many people have story ideas. The story ideas are not complicated to come up with. Many people have them and say, they watch a TV show and they say, well, I could write a better story than this one that I saw or this movie that I saw. And some people think they have talent because once upon a time a teacher told them that their writing was very good. And so they say, why don't I write a novel? The problem is that you need more than talent and you need more than a story idea. And so my pamphlet is to try to help people who come in with kind of unrealistic expectations, but I'd still like to help them get the job done, to actually write that novel and maybe even get it published.
Very, very cool. And why do you think would-be novelists ends up giving up? Is it just a time factor? Is it a discipline factor? What actually is it?
Well, time can be a very convenient excuse. Many people say, I don't have the time. And so part of what I tried to do is to give people some help in how to structure their work week so that they find the time to do the job, so they can get rid of that excuse and actually begin to work on their novel and make progress. It's, part of it is just thinking of the job in such terms as, well, I need at least an hour, or I need at least 2 hours, or I need at least 4 hours. Well, no, you don't. All you need is a few minutes in many cases to make progress. And so in my pamphlet, I try to help people find those small pieces of time which they can use to advance their writing.
It's awesome. 10 things you need to know to write a novel. That's an awesome pamphlet to pick up on Amazon. Before we move on, I just have to say that I am so appreciative of our sponsors and must take the time to thank them. Please support our sponsors and tell them that you heard about them on Hilary Topper On Air. Special thanks to the Russo Law Group, MetPro, Once Again Nut Butter, and Fortunoff Fine Jewelry. Now back to you, Peter. What's the biggest mistake beginner writers make?
Well, the biggest mistake is thinking all they need to do is sit down and write. Writing has to be taken as a job, just like any other job. And that means you have to take yourself seriously. And to do that, you need to do things like have a workspace that's conducive to your work and have time set aside to do the work, and also the materials you need at hand. And then you need to plan. You need to know where you're going and how you're going to get there. It's really attitude, I think, is the key. So in addition to talent and the story idea, you need the attitude. And the attitude is taking the job seriously, having a plan. And the plan is many steps of which I help people come up with in the pamphlet.
So let me ask you something. Somebody sits in front of their computer. They say, okay, I'm going to work 9 to 5. They're sitting in front of their computer and they're just staring at a blank screen. How do you get them past that?
Okay, and that's a very common problem. And the other problem is called writer's block, where people, same thing. They're staring at their screen. They've done some writing, and now they don't know where to go. So again, the plan is essential. So the plan, what I try to do is help people through the process. First of all, you need to know your story's ending. That's something that most people say, well, I'm just going to sit down and write, and it's going to eventually get to the point where I'm going to say, this is the ending. Well, no. Before you even start, you need to know the story's ending. In fact, I recommend that you write the ending first, so that if you're going to take a trip, you get in your car and you don't say, well, I'm going to find the place. I'm just going to start driving. No, you don't do that, do you? You know where you're going. In order to get there in some time in your lifetime, you have to have the ending in mind. And that's the first step that you need to do if you're going to successfully write a novel. Now, there are people who are, famous people who write novels, and they can sit down and just write the novel. But that's because they have the experience. They've developed the craft. They know how to do it. But as for a beginner, you need to know your ending, and you need to even draft it first. You may have to change it later on, but at least you have an idea of where you're going, and now you can plan out the trip. I'm going to go from this city to this city to this city, et cetera, et cetera.
So interesting. I would never have thought that you need to do that, but that makes so much sense to me. Let me ask you something. I want to take it back to your novels that you've written. What what was it that got you thinking, that you'd like to do these type of write these types of thriller novels? Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what got you into that?
Sure. Again, I say not story ideas are cheap or easy to come by, and throughout my work life, I would have an idea for a story. I might be on vacation. I might spend a few days at my computer typing in my story, writing from the beginning without any idea where it was going. And I'd get to the end of the weekend and I'd say, okay, I guess I'm going back to work. And then next weekend, maybe I'll try it again. And I would sit down and say, well, I don't know where to go. So when I retired, I decided to change the methodology. I looked it over maybe a dozen story ideas that I'd saved, and I said, which one do I know the ending? And that's the one I decided to work on. And so I wrote that ending, and I had an idea how to get there. And of course, it wasn't easy. Writing a novel is not something you're going to do in a month. It can take time. Some people spend years on a novel, but beginners, I try to suggest that you can do it in 6 months to a year's time. You start with a draft. You have to have that first draft. It can be lousy. It's going to be lousy. It's going to be filled with holes. But create a draft, and then you have the opportunity to revise it and get it better and better, and eventually to the point where maybe other people would like to read it.
So you start with the ending. Do you need to write an outline?
Well, in school we learned to do outlines. We hated outlines because they didn't make any sense.
Right.
So my suggestion for outlining is very different. I recommend that people develop a narrative outline. And the way you do it is you begin with, tell your story in one paragraph. What is the story about? How is it going to take place in one paragraph? And then as you write, you begin to expand it. Now you expand it to a single page where this is how it begins. This is the situation. Here are my characters. Here's what happens to them. Here's how it ends. Now you've got a page. As you go along, as you're writing, you expand that outline, that narrative outline. So it's now 2 pages or 3 pages. But you keep that one page, because if you're going to get published by a traditional publisher, they're going to ask for a 1-page synopsis. So you're always going to have that 1-page synopsis, which you're going to refine and make better and better as you go along. But you're also going to have a multiple-page narrative outline that you're going to use as you work on your story.
So interesting. This is fascinating to me. So let me ask you something. Besides doing that 1-pager and finding out what the ending is, are there any other common pitfalls that writers face along the way, and how can they be avoided?
Well, there are pitfalls where you write yourself into a corner, where you need to have some an event occur which is not you haven't prepared for. So readers hate this when in the ending, the main character has a gun in their face, and they're everything they planned for and lived for is about to end, and all of a sudden somebody comes to the rescue who wasn't even there, because you haven't figured out how you're going to end the story properly and plan for it. So writing yourself into a corner is a common problem. And again, if you plan, you may find yourself there, but you'll see what's coming, and you say, well, if I do write it this way, I'm going to be in trouble because my character is not going to be able to get out of that situation, or the 2 lovers are not going to be able to get back together in this romance that I'm writing. If I move one to Seattle and the other's living in, Pennsylvania. So you avoid that because you see what's happening as you go.
That's so great. This is such amazing advice. So how can someone get help bringing their story to life?
Okay, well, first, you write that draft, your first draft, and then you revise it. And I recommend that people get involved in a critique group with other writers, because the feedback you will get from other writers can be very valuable. They will see things that you didn't take into account. They will find your mistakes, not just typos and things like that, which are, the last thing you need to work on, but basic story ideas. They will notice when a character acts out of character, when they do something that, again, they didn't expect the person to do, and you haven't prepared the reader for this action or this statement. So get involved in a critique group. And then you can also use what are called beta readers, people who will read the whole novel that you've written and offer feedback. And those people can be friends or family members, and they'll all tell you it's wonderful and they liked it, but maybe they'll also point out some mistakes and some problems. So eventually you feel you got to the point where you can't make it any better, and then you have two choices. One is to self-publish or indie publish, and the other is to try the traditional route, which is to get an agent. And an agent will approach publishers if they like your story. They will approach publishers and try to find a publisher for you. So you have those two options. Finding an agent is not an easy course. There are ways to go about it. And one the easiest way is to go to writers' conferences where agents are there meeting potential writers, hearing about their stories, and if they like what your story is about and what you've told them, they might ask for some pages, 10 pages, 50 pages, and then they'll say, yes, if they like that, they'll ask for the whole thing, and they'll read the whole thing, and then they'll say, yes, I'm going to represent you, or no, I'm not.
Awesome. Now, let me ask you something. As a fellow entrepreneur, and you're a relatively new entrepreneur because this is a second career, I guess, for you, what piece of advice would you give to other entrepreneurs looking to start a business?
Oh, that's a big question. My first business, I was involved in a couple of community newspapers, which I helped start. But my first real company, which still exists today, that I started in 1985, came and I was on vacation, and I read about a technology that enabled organizations and businesses and political campaigns to distribute their press releases to the media electronically. Back in the old times, the ancient times of the 1980s, you had to put your press releases in the mail, which meant that they would arrive 2 or 3 days later to the newspaper, and the newspaper would say, well, that's old news. It's, something that, or maybe they would find it interesting and use it. But electronic distribution was, brand new, and we developed that and expanded on that. I guess, the lessons I learned along the way were to be aware that the world is constantly changing. So your great idea to start a business, you have to take into account that not only is it difficult to get started, raise the money, hire the right people, solve all those problems, but conditions are going to change. Say you start a restaurant and you think you've got the right location, but all of a sudden a highway is built and people are no longer driving past your front door. So, be prepared that the conditions will constantly change, and you have to be flexible enough to adapt to those changes. Otherwise, your business is not going to succeed.
That's awesome advice. Thank you so much, Peter. And finally, how can people get in touch with you and learn more about your pamphlet and your work? And your pamphlet, again, is called 10 Things You Need to Know to Write a Novel.
Right. All of the novels are available on Amazon. And I have a website, Peter G. Pollak, POLLAK.com, and information about me, how to contact me, description of all the novels, and the pamphlet itself.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so much for being on the show. This was an outrageous show, so informative. I also want to thank our sponsors, the Russo Law Group, MedPro, once again, Nut Butter, and Fortune All Fine Jewelry. And last but not least, I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in each week. If you want more information on this show or any other show, visit our new website, hilarytopperonair.com, or you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, you name it, we're out there. Have a great time, a great week, and we'll see you next time.